It was his administration that focused on what was called the Great Society. It was under his administration that we had the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Voting Act, and the Medicare Act. Unfortunately, what brought President Johnson's administration down was the Vietnam War. But in terms of social programs, they really accomplished a lot. Well, the Medicare Act was signed in 1965, and it made sense at that time. By the way, I'm kind of stuck behind the podium because of the microphone. Normally, I wear a handheld. I can kind of walk around Oprah style, so just kind of bear with me. But it made sense that the average, we talked about retirement back in 1965 as 65 years old. That made sense because your average male factory worker in Detroit would work till he's 65, retire, die at 66. Okay, so that makes sense. Retirement age is 65. Well, let's fast forward to today. That's no longer the case. Back in 1965, we had at that time 23 million of the greatest generation. And the greatest generation were the World War II folks. And Tom Brokaw referred to them as the greatest generation. These were the men and women that served in World War II and manned the factories back here in America. The greatest generation in 1965, they were in their mid to late 40s. Back in the 80s then, they were hitting 65 to 70, and now they're pretty much gone. The greatest generation, the World War II folks, again, it's maybe 10, 15 years ago, there were a number of them, both men and women, that were around. Well, they're pretty much gone now, and they've been replaced by 78 million baby boomers. What happened was the soldiers came back from World War II, got married, had kids, and that produced 78 million baby boomers. I'm a boomer. My dad was in World War II. Now, what's interesting though, well, back in 1965, your average factory worker in Detroit might work till he's 65, retire, die at 66. Today, boomers like me, we're going to live to be 85 years old. And our bodies are going to break down at 70 because none of us gets a free pass from getting old, none of us gets a free pass from dying. And it's going to be, and there's 78 million of me, and we are retiring at the rate of 10,000 per day. That's huge. That's a huge strain on what's called our safety net, Social Security, Medicare. You millennials in this room cannot afford us. You millennials in this room, you cannot afford us aging 78 million baby boomers. You can't euthanize us. Because the law says you can't. The law says that you can't euthanize boomers. Now, there'll only be a handful of you, what I'm about to say next, only a few of you will have any idea what I'm about to say. But you younger people, write this down. When you get a chance, go back home tonight or go back to your office and go to Google and type in 2 words. These 2 words are the solution to everything. This will solve all of our problems in terms of paying for the aging baby boomers. And those 2 words are Soylent, S-O-Y-L-E-N-T. Green, Soylent Green. Now, if you'll type in Soylent Green, you'll find that that's the answer to everything. Unfortunately, it's illegal. We can't do that, but that is the answer. Now, what's interesting though, the difference between boomers today and earlier generations is that we are the Woodstock generation. Psychologically and emotionally, we cannot get old. We just can't. When you think of folks who retired a couple of generations ago, you think of them moving to Scottsdale and playing shuffleboard. That's no longer the case with boomers. Those of us that were born between 1946 and 1964, emotionally, psychologically, we cannot get old. When I wake up one day and I'm 78 years old and I'm driving to a grocery store, I'm not going to be listening to Lawrence Welk. Okay, I'm going to be listening to Stairway to Heaven, The Dark Side of the Moon. And that's kind of strange, in fact, kind of creepy. You think about it, but that's what I grew up with, and there's 78 million of me. Plus, boomers, as we age, we expect to be active. We expect to be running triathlons, and we expect to be going to Rolling Stones concerts until we die. I'm convinced the Stones will be playing when I'm 85 years old. I'm also convinced that Keith Richards died about 15 years ago, and they just stuffed him, kind of like a weekend at Bernie's. You know, that's kind of, Richards up on the stand, he got the lit cigarette and his guitar, and that's it. But that's who the boomers are. Now, and we expect to be very active. Unfortunately, there's not a pot of gold in DC to take care of us. There's not a trust fund. There's not this wonderful trust fund. You know, we, the 78 million baby boomers, have been paying in to Medicare and Social Security our whole lives. So we like to think that there's this big old giant bank account there that says, okay, when you guys turn 65, you start drawing Social Security, you get on Medicare, life is good. Well, that's just not true. Back in the 60s, in particular, and then carrying on today, any money that was paid in was used to fund the Vietnam War, or was used to fund the 2 Iraq wars, or was used to fund other stuff. There's no money. It's a big Ponzi scheme, money in, money out. And so that's going to be the challenge is there going to be enough money coming in from the working millennials and those underneath you, those younger than you, to pay for the aging Americans. And so this is going to be a really interesting phenomenon to watch. As of today, approximately 70% of the household net worth are owned by baby boomers, people like me. Combined because we stood the test of time. We've put some money into some 401ks and we paid off our houses, and so we got some net worths, and so 70% of total net worth is owned by the aging boomers. Now, what does this mean from a healthcare standpoint? How do we, particularly you younger people out in the room, how do you pay for the aging boomers? And the watchword is cost containment. Our healthcare in the United States is good. We get great healthcare. Unfortunately, it's very, very, very cost inefficient. We operate in what is called a fee-for-service model, and all that means is this. Think of a farm. Think of farm silos. You got your grain silos. So think of 3 or 4 grain silos right next to each other. You're going to have your doctor silo. These are the you go see your doctor, he or she has an encounter with you and prescribes something. And then you have your hospital silo. Go to BSA or Northwest and you get some type of treatment. And then you go to your respiratory therapist or physical therapist silo, and he or she does his thing in terms of helping to bring you back to health. Or you might go over to what's called a SNF, SNF, or Skilled Nursing Facility silo. And that's where when you check out of BSA, you go and stay for 21 days or 30 days at Bivens or someplace until you rehab so you can go back home. These are all silos. You have your pharmacy silo, you have your home health silo. Home health means that a nurse will come see you every day to help you with your dressings, things like that. You have your medical equipment silo. This is when you need a nebulizer or an oxygen concentrator or a hospital bed. So you have all these silos right next to each other, and they don't coordinate with each other. None of them really knows what the other is doing, and it's very inefficient. Under the fee-for-service model, each of these healthcare providers is paid money for a certain type of treatment, or a certain type of service, or a certain type of product. Now that money that's paid is not dependent on outcome. In other words, if BSA treats Mr. Smith, or if Dr. Jones treats Mr. Smith, Dr. Jones or BSA, they're going to get paid. There's some exceptions, but basically they're going to get paid regardless of whether or not the outcome is, whether or not Mr. Smith gets better. And you just get paid for it. It's fee for service. I provide the service, you give me the fee. It doesn't really matter how well Mr. Smith does. And then on top of that, you don't have what's called collaboration or cooperation. Well, we've been able to get by with that as a country up until about now. When you only had 23 million of the World War II generation and another 20 million of the Korean War generation, we could get by with that, but we just can't anymore. The numbers are too huge with the aging baby boomers. And so what's happening in healthcare, there is a sea change, it's a shift. And that is, let's try to keep patients away from doctors. Let's try to keep patients away from hospitals. Let's try to, in a sense, dumb down healthcare so that base level healthcare is provided by nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nurses, nurse aides, pharmacists, therapists. In other words, let's not go see a doctor unless we have to. Let's not go into a hospital unless we have to. Let's try to provide health care as inexpensively as possible. I call these ancillary providers. That is, providers other than doctors and hospitals. For example, I rarely get sick. When I do get sick, I always know what's going to be. I'm going to get a sore throat. This time I'm going to get an ear infection over here, and that's about it. I know exactly what I need. I need an antibiotic. And it just galls me to no end to have to go to a doctor's office, sit for 30 minutes in the waiting room with a bunch of people sniffling and coughing and hacking and everything else, go in and see my doctor for 2 minutes and have him say, yeah, you need amoxicillin, and I say, thank you very much, and leave. Totally inefficient and unnecessary. I would just soon talk to a nurse or to a nurse practitioner. And so that is where healthcare is going, is trying to shove treatment to what are called ancillary providers, those other than hospitals and doctors. In addition to that, we're seeing an increase in what's called telehealth. Now, telehealth basically means that instead of me sitting in the same room with Dr. Jones, instead I'm having a Skype or a FaceTime or some type of some type of video encounter with Dr. Jones, where I say to him, okay, here's what the deal is, here's what I got. And 7 or 8 out of 10 times, he's gonna say, okay, I know what you need. And then he will order something, and I can go pick it up at the local pharmacy. There's a company out there that's called Teledoc, T-E-L-A, capital D-O-C, and that's a large telehealth company. Our law firm subscribes to it, probably other employers in this room do as well. And it's a godsend. I remember a couple of years ago, I was in New Orleans speaking at a conference, and I had a real bad ear infection. And so I called Teledoc and said, I've got an ear infection. So the doctor called me back 5 minutes later, we talked, he goes, okay, you need eardrops. And I said, thank you. And so he called the eardrops into a local pharmacy, which was a block away from the hotel, got my eardrops, life was good. That's very efficient. It's much more efficient and cheaper than if I had to go into an urgent care center or go to a doctor's office. And so we're seeing healthcare shift over to telehealth. We're seeing healthcare shift over to nurse practitioners and physician assistants and RNs so that we can decrease cost. We're also seeing a shift in reimbursement from, again, fee-for-service. Dr. Jones, you did this, I paid you money. BSA, you did this, I paid you money. Instead, we're seeing, they're called third-party payors. When you think of a third-party payor, you think just a commercial insurance company, Aetna, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Humana, whatever, and they're kind of taking the lead on this. Medicare, I'll come back in a second, but Medicare is usually several years behind the private sector. And so the commercial insurers are saying, you know, we're going to condition reimbursement on patient outcome. You've got to show us that something good is happening to this patient, or we're going to pay you less, or we're not going to pay you at all. In other words, we're going to pay you for the outcome, not just for your service. We're going to get away from fee-for-service. That makes sense, and that's where commercial insurers are going, and eventually that's where Medicare is going to go. Medicare, the government, particularly Medicare is for the elderly and for the disabled. You're 65 or older, you're on Medicare. If you're poor, you're on Medicaid. Medicaid's for the poor. And Medicaid, well, Medicare is truly just strictly a federal program. Medicaid is a combination federal-state. Medicaid programs are partially paid for by the state, partially paid for by the federal government. Medicare is strictly federal. But both Medicare and Medicaid are really pushing healthcare providers to work collaboratively, to work in a cooperative fashion. Let's break down these silos. Let's talk together. Let's work as a team, and then let's get reimbursed as a team. Now, who pays for all this? Of course, Medicare, we pay for it as the taxpayers. I've been paying into it forever and ever, but frankly, the money I've paid into is already gone. And so you millennials, you younger people, you're gonna pay for my health care as I get older. Medicaid, again, is a combination of state and federal. Now, what I do, and what I spend a lot of time on is fraud. And by that I mean, our attorneys and our healthcare group, we do mostly regulatory. That is, we try to keep companies from doing dumb things. Because if you commit healthcare fraud, then you can get indicted and sent to Club Fed. And so we try to, and that's true with hospitals and hospital executives, doctors. Of course, doctors are kind of the gold standard. The Department of Justice can put a doctor away. That's a real feather in the cap. When we think about healthcare fraud, let's try to. I'm watching the time here, Clara. But I mean, thinking of where's Clara? She's somewhere. There we go. You're sitting next to your daughter. Okay. By the way, you know Kelsey, who's the lead singer of the Stones?
Mick Jagger.
Who? Say it out loud.
Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger. That's the reason that Kelsey still has a job with us. It's because she knows answers like that. She knew that the lead singer and she knows at least one of the Beatles, right? If not all four of them. Okay. As long as she knows important information like that, then she has a job with Brown Fortunato. The moment that she starts slipping back into millennial mode and doesn't know anything about the 60s, then she's out. Okay.
That's fair.
That's right. That's fair enough. But there are think of two legal systems in the United States. You've got your state system, where every county in the United States has its own district attorney's office, your local DA. Under the local DA, you've got your assistant DAs, your ADAs. Potter County, Randall County. DUI, rob, toot, total, whatever. Okay, and so you get thousands and thousands of district attorney's offices all throughout the United States. But then, that's the state system. The federal system, we have only 93 U.S. attorney's offices. There's one in Dallas. We're just a branch or division of the Dallas U.S. Attorney's Office up here in Amarillo and Lubbock. So we have 93 U.S. Attorney's offices. This is on the federal side. The U.S. Attorney is a political appointee, meaning all of them today are Republicans, and during the Obama administration, they were all Democrats. Under the U.S. Attorney, we have what are called career prosecutors. These are called AUSAs, or Assistant United States Attorneys. They stay in office regardless of, they stay on the job regardless of who's in the White House. Now, figuratively, you might have, New York might have several U.S. Attorney's offices, so does California. Montana has one, or South Dakota has one. Okay? You go into a U.S. Attorney's office, and figuratively, if not literally, you have a hallway. You walk down the hallway. On the right side are offices of what are called civil AUSAs. And these are prosecutors that try to collect money. And then on the left side of the hallway, you walk down, you have what are called the criminal AUSAs. And these are the ones that try to put you in Club Fed. Over the years, I've defended a whole bunch of criminal cases. I've only had 2 CEOs go to prison, and they deserved it. They were both looking at 7 to 10 years apiece. I got them down to 11 months and 18 months, and that was a big one. They had great business models. I mean, they had really successful companies. It was just big felonies, all it was. And but what happens is there's an animal. Just make you aware of when it comes to healthcare fraud, and then I'll start shutting down here in a few minutes. There is an animal out there that's called whistleblower, or Quitam, Q-U-I-T-A-M. This was actually a federal statute that was actually authored by President Lincoln at the beginning of the Civil War, because there were companies in the North that were selling rancid meat or gunpowder that wouldn't spark to the Northern military. And so President Lincoln wrote a law that says private citizens can sue companies in their names and in the name of the United States. Well, that has morphed to what we have today, which is with only 93 U.S. Attorney's offices, the federal Department of Justice. Here in Texas, we have the Texas AG's office. That's the state system. In In DC, we have the Department of Justice, that's the federal system. There are only a limited number of warm bodies out there in the Department of Justice that can investigate fraud. The FBI only has so many agents, the Department of Justice only has so many attorneys, the Department of Justice only has so many investigators. And so they can't uncover everything. But what happens is every employee of a hospital, BSA, of a physician's office, of a pharmacy, is aware of an animal called a qui-tam or a whistleblower. And all that means is that if I'm an employee of St. Mary's Hospital, and I know that St. Mary's Hospital is gaming the system, St. Mary's is billing Medicare more than it should be. St. Mary's is providing this type of procedure, billing for something else. St. Mary's is providing procedures and billing for them, but those procedures really aren't necessary. It's just a gaming the system. Then I, as an employee of St. Mary's Hospital, I can go to an attorney and say, let's file a lawsuit, let's file a whistleblower suit. So the attorney then files a lawsuit. Jeff Baird individually and in the name of the United States of America versus St. Mary's Hospital. The lawsuit is based on what's called the Federal False Claims Act. And that basically all that means is that if the hospital is doing something it shouldn't be doing, whether it's kickbacks or fudging documents, whatever it is, but the hospital eventually produces a claim that's submitted to Medicare and Medicare pays for it, that's a false claim. And under the False Claims Act, the hospital and its executives can be liable for actual damages, 3 times actual damages, plus up to $22,000 for every single claim. Okay, it's huge. And the False Claims Act would be criminal or civil. And I, as the whistleblower, whatever money St. Mary's ends up paying, I get about 15 to 20% of it. And so what happens then is my attorney files his lawsuit, it goes under seal, nobody knows about it. St. Mary's doesn't know about it. This lawsuit, this petition, then goes on to the desk of a civil AUSA. The civil AUSA will then decide, the Department of Justice will then conduct its own investigation, take about a year to investigate it. And then we'll decide whether or not to take the lawsuit over at which time then the lawsuit is unsealed and served on the hospital. At that point in time then, the civil AUSA says to my attorney, you and Mr. Baird just sit on the sidelines and watch. Let the big boys take over. And the Department of Justice takes it over. Now, I know our law firm defends these sorts of things. Now, what happens though is at least 90% of all criminal investigations result from these civil whistleblower lawsuits. What happens is the AUSA on the civil side, on this side of the hallway, looks at this lawsuit and then looks at the evidence and says, wow, this looks like a crime. And so then that civil AUSA will take the file, walk across the hallway, hand it to a, if you're leaving early, I'm not going to be offended, but we're fine. What is your name again? Clara, if I'm ever invited back to speak here, she's not invited. Pardon me?
Paul's fault.
Paul who?
Williamson.
Well, Paul's a good friend of mine. So tell him, you can tell Paul that I said, you can say. In fact, I know Williamson well enough, he's not nearly as important as I am.
Sorry.
Okay, so just trying to make your folks feel welcome.
Thank you.
But what happens is the civil AUSA takes this file and goes over and hands it to the criminal AUSA and say, should we go indict somebody? And so often what happens when we're defending these things, we have to reach 2 settlements, one with the civil AUSA and one with the criminal AUSA. That's how fraud comes to the attention of the Department of Justice. Well, the point I'm trying to make is that if you take $10,000 and put it in a brown paper bag and lay it along the side of a highway, somebody's going to pick it up. Human nature, somebody will pick it up. Well, likewise, you have billions. Remember how much that was, Amy? Just 70 billion? No, 700. You gave me something this morning about the how much we spent on Medicare. I think like 77 billion. It was ridiculous. Anyhow, the Medicare program spends billions of dollars. And that billions of dollars goes to doctors and pharmacies and durable medical equipment companies and therapists and labs and everybody else. Well, it's human nature to want to put your hand in there. Let's just grab that brown paper bag. Let's grab some money. And the relationship that the healthcare community has, healthcare providers have with the government is kind of like when you take your kids to the pizza arcade and you play whack-a-mole. You know, well, same thing, literally. You'll have, you know, as of today, we have all these little fraudulent things popping up, and so the government comes and whacks them down. But tomorrow we'll have others over here, and that's just it's always been that way, and will always be that way. And so there are, as healthcare providers, no matter whether you're like Fred's Pharmacy or St. Mary's Hospital, you're regulated by a whole bunch of federal anti-fraud laws, highly, highly regulated. And so I guess in conclusion, you know, this is going to be an interesting time. The country has never experienced such a large aging population. Particularly an aging population that's going to live as long as we live. And somebody's going to pay for us. And so it's going to be an interesting dynamic as we try to figure out as a country, how do we fund the Medicare program? How do we fund the state Medicaid programs? How do we reduce the cost of health care? How do we shove health care down to nurse practitioners and nurses and others who are just as qualified to diagnose my sore throat as an MD is? It's going to be an interesting dynamic, you know, obviously for the rest of our lives. I appreciate it. Claire, I appreciate you inviting me. Becky, I appreciate you thinking that Becky's the one that talked. She caught me in a weak moment. I had given this video webinar for about 2 hours. I had about 200 pharmacists. Am I being recorded here or filmed? Oh well, I've said worse. And for the last 30 minutes, so I'm live with about 200 pharmacists all over the country. And for the last 30 minutes, I really had to use the restroom, like real bad. And I mean, it was really bad. And so finally, and I had to suffer through a bunch of question and answers afterwards. And I'm trying to act professional. And so finally, when the webinar got through, I'm walking down the hallway, and Becky grabs me and wouldn't let me go use the restroom until I agreed to come here and speak. So it's been a lot of fun. Claire and Becky, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Do you have time for questions and answers?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take whatever question. Basically, we'll do Q&A, and I can spend as much time as you need.
Do you have to go to the bathroom?
Pardon? I'm good. And I edit that last part out, Kelsey, okay? Thank you. I should know the answer, okay? If I don't know the answer, I'm just going to fake it and tell you whatever comes to my mind, okay? Okay, what's your first question?
Does anybody have questions?
Wait a sec, I thought you had some questions. I will repeat the question.
Okay. Now, I was just wondering if you had time for questions.
I've got time for questions.
Okay, all right.
If anybody has one.
Is anybody have anything?
Yes, the woman back there.
I've heard that since I'm a boomer too.
You're a boomer?
Yes, I am.
Do you like the Stones?
I've never listened to them.
Wait a second. If I said to you Woodstock, what does that mean to you?
A great big party with a lot of drugs.
Yeah. Jimi Hendrix playing the Star Spangled Banner. Yeah, Jefferson Airplane. Okay, I'm trying to figure out whether or not you're a real boomer or a fake boomer. Okay.
Very sheltered life.
Okay. So what's your question?
I've always heard that, as you stated, the two things wrong with Social Security was, number one, the funds were used for other things, and number two, the Congress has their own system and not a part of Social Security. So if those two things were fixed, would that fix Social Security?
Yeah, the question is, she'd always, Okay, you taping all this, Kelsey?
Yep.
Okay. Her question was, and I'm still not convinced you're a boomer, but we'll just pretend you are, okay? Two of the problems with Social Security is that the money was used for something else, and number two, Congress has a different type of retirement and a different type of health care. Yeah, those are issues, but we can't, at the end of the day, we can't magically go in today or tomorrow and replenish this trust fund for Social Security. There's this, it's too much, and so I think it's going to be money in, money out for the rest of our lives. I think Social Security is going to be, and Medicare eventually be what's called means, M-E-A-N-S tested, meaning that those who are on the higher end of the socioeconomic scale, the higher net worth, they're going to pay more for Medicare in terms of their Part B. They're going to get less benefits, and they're going to get fewer benefits out of Social Security than those on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. As far as Congress is concerned, Congress has its own health coverage, has its own retirement. Good luck on that. So, any other questions? Okay, Claire, what this tells me is either I've wowed them and everybody just thinks it was a great job, or this was the most boring presentation.
You have wowed them, right?
Okay.